I'll be giving you a small introduction about our speaker today. Today we have Eva Fransch from Storefront New York. She's the Executive Director and Chief Curator of Storefront of Art and Architecture. She's a Catalan architecture researcher, teacher, and founder of Solo Practice of Office of Architectural Affairs. Prior to joining the Storefront in 2010, she directed the master's thesis studio at Rice University. She earned her master's degree from ESTAB UPC, and second master's also from Princeton University. She has lectured nationally and internationally on art and architecture and design, and the importance of alternative practice in the construction of understanding of public life. So without further ado, I give you Eva.
This is the microphone, okay. Good night, everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, everyone, for having me here tonight. This is my second time in Kuwait, in a different role than the first time that I actually came to visit this city that occupies a very interesting point into the collective imaginary on what the Middle East is and represents also within the culture of the Gulf. Before we start talking about Storefront for Art and Architecture and what is my role as the director of this institution, I would like to start making a reflection about how do we understand architecture nowadays, and what is the relevance of a practice that during the last 50 years has been put into a space of disciplinary action and expertise that somehow has pushed it away from all its full spectrum of responsibilities. Architecture perhaps is one of the only disciplines that has the privilege, but also the duty, to articulate all the different forces that constitute society, the social, the political, the economical, the cultural, into single action, into a single form. Call it city, call it a building, call it simply space of design. All these different forces, they do not only come through the articulation of these dominant elements of culture, but the architect also has the responsibility and the duty to be the spokesperson for those people who are not sitting in the table of power. So who are those underrepresented voices that do not have the power to sit in the space of construction are the ones that the architect needs to be a representative of. So with this voice of trying to understand architecture as the discipline that articulates all the different subjects, all the different collectivities, I'm here to make a claim for architecture as the discipline that also speaks for those ones that are not in the decision-making space. With that said, if we would want to say that architecture is made by architects, who are the architects? And today probably in this room we have architects of all kind of different ways of practice. I always like to distinguish architects in three kinds. The iconographers, the enablers, and the agitators. Who are these three types of architects? The iconographer is the architect that is interested in making symbols that actually feels that can represent the spirit of a society or a culture by making buildings that represent the spirit of that time. Most of the times, those architects use metaphors or use certain devices to try to bring that space of representation. And most of the times, we end up with buildings that look like butterflies, sometimes other cheesy metaphors, but that act of representation and symbolism most of the times ends up with a very banal representation of who we are and what we do as a society. So we have the iconographers, then we have the enablers. The architect that is an enabler, what he or she does is simply try to produce an architecture that serves the desires that are already there, either of politicians or developers or individuals that have a preconceived idea of what society is, should do, and look like. The enabler allows for very little space of innovation. And so the enabler at the end is very similar to the dictator in the sense that doesn't produce for other voices to be heard or talked. And then we have the third type of architect, that is the agitator. That is the one that is interested in denouncing the iconographers, denouncing the enablers, and simply in that act of denunciation is also unable to produce anything. So with these three types of architects, that sometimes there is an architect that makes the three different functions in different projects, I'm here to make a cause or an argument for doing the three things at the same time, to be able to find new forms that represent our society, while at the same time we enable for the desires of a society that embraces the voices that are not only in that decision-making table, and at the same time an agitator that is able to denounce and to somehow disrupt the structures that are already in place. So this kind of architect, I always call him a utopianizer, not because he's able to produce a utopia that is outside of society, but because it is an alternative space that is within society, that is really able to understand, to facilitate, and at the same time to provoke. So with this introduction about where do I see the role of architecture within society and where do I see the role of the architect within that space, I'm going to try to explain what is that storefront is and does. And storefront is and does this: merge, show, perform, transform, confuse, surprise, move, invade, blow, invite, enable, provoke, help, touch, fit, invite, remember, eat, and love. So what are these words is mostly everything that I'm going to say in the next 45 minutes. This is exactly everything that we do in order to try to produce a moment of contemporaneity. Storefront for Art and Architecture is this institution that was founded in 1982. There was a diagram I wanted to show you before that. In 1982, as perhaps even nowadays, we could say that society is extremely striated, divided within social, political, ecological, cultural, technological spheres of expertise. We are mostly in the Western culture invaded by a certain notion of crisis in social, in political, in ecological, in cultural, in technological terms. And this is my understanding of what art and architecture can do and should do within this space of striation. Storefront is not an institution that tries to bring more clarity and more division into the fields, but tries to bring this, more confusion, a space where all these disciplines operate into the construction of a whole. This kind of confusion started in 1982 with an understanding that Kyung Park, the founder of Storefront for Art and Architecture, he realized that the spheres of action in New York were too institutionalized at the university, in research institutions, in museums, but there was not a space where artists, architects, writers, anthropologists, philosophers could come together to think about what is the world that we want to live in? What is the public life that we want to construct? So in order to do that, he created this space that what allowed was simply to bring all these different voices into a space of action. It started in a very small space in Prince Street, and it moved into a bigger space in Kenmare. Still, this space is 98 square meters. And as you see, it doesn't have the canonical space of a gallery space. It has a very strange triangular shaped. And it is this strangeness, this smallness that has made of a storefront space of experimentation. It started with this facade, a facade that was always a space for the installation of artists and architects. And in 1992, it commissioned a project to Stephen Hall and Vito Conci, then still an artist, to produce a facade that would question the notions of what a gallery is, of what an institution is, of what inside and outside is, to produce something that was able to really question and problematize all those different aspects of what an institution is and does. Events, performances that really try to address issues of the time, homelessness, but also notions of queer space and sexuality, and also trying to understand where are the limits of architecture with this Yves Klein's air architecture, or trying to understand what is the role of an institution, questioning the role of art or the larger institution as such. Storefront is the place where many artists and architects that today we regard as very much established within the status quo started their career. More than 1,000 artists have shown their work, including Dan Graham, including Liz Diller and Ricardo Scofidio, where they had their first show. Storefront has always tried to understand the role of society and the architect, even in the recent events of the Occupy Wall Street movement. If we move into the present time, I'm going to explain which different areas of action does a Storefront occupy. We do 5 things. We do events, we do publications, we do competitions, exhibitions, and projects. And within these 5 areas of action, we try to address different temporalities. With events, we try to understand the now. With publications, we try to understand the recent past. With competitions, we try to address the immediate future. With exhibitions, we try to produce experiments. We are not interested in display. And with projects, we try to understand what it means to go outside. So this is how an event at a Storefront looks like. People are inside and outside, and at the same time, they are all the time outside and inside. Within the modes of operation of events, we really are not interested in producing canonical formats. We are experimenting in formats of debate and discussion. So for instance, this was an instant architecture event where we had 3 computers where people could sit down and they were given 3 minutes to draw in AutoCAD, an extremely architectural, detail-oriented device, and produce drawings projected into the facade across the storefront. This moment of drawing with one of our regular tools of production, ideas, concepts into the urban landscape is a way to try to start and trigger a way of creative action within our everyday tools of production. How to create events. We have the manifesto series. What is a manifesto? And why do we need to do manifestos in the year 2013? The manifesto series started from a desire that I encountered every time that an architect would come to me or an artist. They would explain their project, and what I would hear mostly was an obsession. I'm not interested in obsessions. I'm interested in positions. How does one move from an obsession to a position is an act of articulation. Manifestos usually do 3 things. First, they denounce a pre-existing or past or present condition. They establish a desirable condition. And the third, they show a methodology of action. So how a manifesto is able to move oneself from a position of an obsession to a position of an argument, something that for me as a director of a cultural institution is extremely important. What do you stand for? What is that you really want to change? What is that is not good enough, and how do we get there? So this is what the manifesto series is about. We also have a very interesting way to try to confront ideas. We have a series that is called the interrogation series. When someone publishes a book, when someone does a building, when someone actually tries to put an idea outside there, that idea should be interrogated. That idea should be exposed to the spaces of expertise and power that are able to test how important and relevant that idea is. So we do interrogations. Every book, every building should be a crime, and we should know if it is a crime of egoism, of narcissism, of power, or really of change and ideas. So how do we do that? Through events. How do we actually talk about architecture in a different way? Sometimes lectures like this can be extremely boring, right? Formats are really on a kind of contented form. We believe that Other ways to talk about architecture are possible. This is another series. They are called the cabaret series. What a cabaret is really trying to understand how through humor, seduction, and play, we can talk about what we do and how we do. This, for instance, is Craig Bagley. He's a PhD candidate from Princeton University, talking about his thesis in a cloud of smoke. I don't think his thesis was ever as clear as this day while he was narrating some of his ideas through that environment. We also have forums, but we also have what we call productive disagreements. I don't know how easy it is in this context, in your cultural context, to disagree. But in New York, it's really hard. You sit down with someone, you say something that someone doesn't agree, and that person will just say, right. Sure, you know that they are disagreeing, but they are unable to tell you into your face that is really an awful idea, or that is an awful building. How do you bring and educate the public to expose into the public voice contrarian ideas? So we have these events that are called productive disagreements, where we actually ask people, because we know that they are not able to disagree, that they agree that they are going to disagree. So with this idea, the first event that we had, it was about the conflict in Israel and Palestine, right? We had people from the Israeli lobby and people from the Palestinian lobby. We tried to have a conversation about the conflict. They knew that they were going to agree to disagree. We all know that they disagree. What happened? For an hour, they could not disagree. They agreed for the entire time. So, of course, we realized we failed in even producing a disagreement when we know there is a disagreement. So what we also do, we do a total enthusiasm event, another series. So this is how, as a curator, as a director of this institution, or any institution, one needs to understand the context to be able to produce another space. So the total enthusiasm, what does it consist on? It consists in giving people a glass of wine, or a glass of tea, or a glass of anything, and they need to make a toast. How many of you have been into a wedding, and when the people make a toast, they're actually introducing some criticism in there, right? So the moment that you ask someone, just please say something beautiful about this book, or say something beautiful about this project, you put 10 people together and ask them to make a toast, they will start disagreeing. They will start inserting criticism. So this is what the total enthusiasm is about. So as you can see, I'm just explaining you a process of curation of events that try to bring an understanding and the production of real thoughts into space. These events, what we try to do is to bring older generations with younger generations. This was an event that was called Finding Formless, where these two kids who just graduated from the school, they came to me and said, Eva, we would like to talk about formlessness. And I said, again, we all know that in the 70s and the 80s there were plenty of books and ideas articulated in that regard. Well, I said, let's try to figure out if we can get the main characters into play. So here we have Hal Foster, who is the director of the art department at Princeton University, Yves, who is the main authority on the formlessness when he wrote his book with Rosalind Krauss, and Michael Meredith, who is someone who is practicing within that space. And we had Vito Acconci, and we had more people in this round table. That conversation, that was a manifesto series, was so good that we are actually going into publishing it. So how do we produce all these kind of different events is something that really tries to agitate the conversation, the idea of public sphere of discussion. And this is something that I'm not only doing it through words, I'm also doing it through food. This is the paella series, and this is supposed to be not only funny, but extremely serious. How do we have the best conversations? It's not necessarily here in this space of conversation, sometimes around a dinner table with a relaxed state. Does anyone know what is the MacGuffin effect? Anyone? Alfred Hitchcock, in his films, he used to use a device that is called the MacGuffin effect. So he would be recording a scene, and so there is, imagine like a train, a corridor, there is a guy coming with his luggage, the camera gets a close shot of that luggage, and you see that luggage coming up, the luggage goes into the luggage compartment, and you know, right, that something is happening in that piece of luggage. You are sure that there is something, that piece of luggage, that will resolve the crime and so on. The film goes on, the luggage never appears again, and by the end of the film you realize that while you were looking into the luggage, the crime happened, right? And it's only by the end of the film that he makes you go back and realize that actually that space of distraction was the one that allowed the real crime scene to happen. So that's a MacGuffin effect. That's what the paella is about. You invite people to say, we're going to have a paella conversation about, this case was display and architecture. In that space of what I call latent attention, forced distraction, thoughts are coming more directly. And this is what I call the intellectual gut. How can you coordinate your stomach, right? Your feelings, your instinctual way to talk and address things with your knowledge. So this is also one of our series. We have also started a new kind of series, the definition series, where we take one word and we try to define it several times. We asked 20 people to define the same word. The first one was museum. What is a museum? How many definitions can we have of that? Second word was capital. What does capital mean? We also have the reading images series. And what is the reading images series do is really trying to understand how the culture of internet and consumption of images has produced an inability to read and to see what is behind that. And so we are interested in doing that. So we do the same. We give an image and we make 10 people read that image. And with that, we evolve and articulate. Today, actually, we were talking about doubles, copies, and fakes. This is obviously a copy. This is a copy that is double the size of its copy. And this allowed us to do a manifesto series about doubles, copies, and fakes that is also going to come as a new publication in the fall. And this comes to the space of events, publications. Storefront has been, from its first day in 1982, 18 September, publishing this little pamphlet. This is a newsprint that opens up. This was the means of communication back then when we didn't have Twitter or emails or anything of the like, to understand what is that is going on. We still publish them and we still send them. And if you become members, you always receive one. And it is a way for us as well to experiment with graphic designers, with what can be said in a different medium. Of course, these newsprints have been a medium for many people to communicate all kind of different ideas. But we also produce books. And the books, we take them as serious as the events or as the exhibitions, because the book is also a medium to explore. This piece of book is from the Bridge project, from an exhibition of Dohosu, where the book has two beginnings and two ends, where the end is actually in the real middle, where you can actually flip the entire book and discover new modes of legibility. And it is in this idea of trying to understand how each medium is the conduit for a way of pushing ideas further, where we actually try to be. As I said, this one is coming up. We do events, we do publications, we also do competitions, and I will speak about one of the current competitions towards the end. We do competitions and we get people from all over the place. And these competitions are sometimes like the call for ideas for the White House Redux, trying to really understand. This was a competition held in 2007, trying to question, reinvent, if we were to redesign the White House nowadays, how would it be? How can we represent the power or the loss of power that that building has represented and embodied throughout the years? If we were to represent again the $1 bill, what elements would we put in there? Maybe not the faces of people, but some notions of energy. Or if we were to redesign the Statue of Liberty again, what would it look like? Or if we were to redesign the Whitney, and so on. But what is interesting about that is that competitions are not only about ideas. 2 years ago, when we started together with the New Museum and the Architectural League and the Poetry Bowery Club and so on, the Ideas City Festival, we said architecture and agitation And emerging design should not only happen in the world of ideas, should also happen in the real life. So to be in the avant-garde is not only to be outside throwing stones, it's actually building with those stones. So we said, okay, we are going to have a festival, and we all have seen all these white tents. White tents that in all these street festivals, they're extremely repetitive and horrendous. So we said, let's try to reinvent them and show to the city that with the same budget that it costs to rent them, we can have imaginative architects reinventing that model. We did a competition, we received, this year we did it again, we received more than 80 submissions, and we got this element designed and built with the same amount that it cost to rent them. They can come closer, they can come expanded, and this is a place where these architects, it was their first project in New York, and now they are already envisioning all kind of different new ideas. What kind of other competitions do we do? This is, I don't live that far from Zuccotti Park. For the ones that are familiar with what happened in New York with the Occupy movement, Zuccotti Park was taken over. It's close to Wall Street, and there was plenty of people from all the different disciplines trying to understand how to contribute to society. But this is what I found: arts and culture attached to a tree with some people sleeping next to it. When I said, what can I do? What can we do as an institution? They said, we would love if you could design us some shelters so that we could stay here safely and healthy and so on. And I said, no, this is not what architects do. This is not what we do. What we do, we reinvent the ways and the interaction in which citizens can interact with the structures of power. We can definitely help you, but not by designing shelters, but by redesigning new strategies for public occupation and engagement. And this is what we did. And we did an entire competition, and we received more than 200 submissions for that. Events, publications, competitions, exhibitions. As I said, we have had more than 1,000 artists throughout the history of a storefront. And as I say, exhibitions are not about showing buildings, are not trying to show just elements of display. They are trying to experiment. They are trying to give a platform for innovative thinkers to try to test some of those ideas and to see how can we move towards the future in a way that differs from the past, that learns from it, but tries to go beyond that. So this is a project that was done by Esna Architecture and Daniel Arsham, that we filled the entire gallery with foam, and they spent 1 month excavating it and allowing people to come inside and to understand what is this space of interiority that can be created if one thinks architecture as a kind of subtractive practice. Finding encounters, of course, when the panels shift, as strange as this one. We do exhibitions that even when we show some work, this was Painting Urbanism. It's the compilation of the work of Hassan Han that have been doing work in the favelas in Rio and also in different places around the world. How to understand that even in a highly constructed world, there is still a space for larger ideas to understand the city. So how these mega paintings, how these super graphics, how this tradition that we have inherited can be utilized almost in the same way that Baron Haussmann was cutting avenues in Paris, we could paint avenues through the cities that we inhabit. So this Painting Urbanism was an exhibition that through even the installation tried to bring that. This was an exhibition we had a year ago, Sacred Spaces in Profane Buildings. It was back 2 years ago, in 2011, when it was the 10th anniversary of the attacks at the World Trade Center. And as you might know or not know, there was a huge polemic on a mosque, that cultural center that wanted to actually just put a facade, a beautiful project, really close to ground zero. There was such a huge polemic in New York that really didn't happen. But the cultural center is there and the mosque is there. And we just wanted to show to New Yorkers that as much as New York wants to show itself as a secular space, it is not the case. It is full of religious spaces, yet they are not visible. And at the storefront, we believe that it's extremely important to give visibility to all the different movements and structures that are there in society. So Matilde Casani transform the gallery into space of religious understanding, where each one of these books, with each one of these stands, was having a map, and we mapped throughout the entire city all the different praying little mosques, shrines, churches that exist in basements, in the back rooms, in parking lots, in rooftops. And we even asked for a collaborative project, so you still can go to Sacred Spaces in Profane Buildings, that is a webpage where people could submit their projects, and they were actually explaining where did they find that space and how was it located and where it was, how it was utilized, and how architecture somehow sometimes is present but also disguised. And so I think this is a very interesting way to understand how a storefront really tries to bring the ideas that are invisible, visible, and sometimes just bring them into the public voice. When we do exhibitions, sometimes those exhibitions are also simply performances. This was a project that was done together with the Harrison Atelier and dancers from the Merce Cunningham Dance Company before it actually disappeared, as a way to understand the gallery as a performative space. It was architecture and cultural placebos, and it transformed the gallery into this stage, and then backstage, transforming the entire perception of the interior space. First, of course, when you were inside, you thought that you were a spectator looking into a spectacle. When the facade would open, suddenly you were in the backdrop of that. And how to change this idea that we are not just simple spectators of society or of culture. We are always participants, regardless of where we position ourselves. Even if we just are walking in or passing by, we are still part of that. So this was what this performance was about. Culture is not only inside, it's also outside. And with these strategies for urban occupation, this call that we did, the installation was simply a space for people within the Occupy movement to come into the space, into the gallery. And as you can see here, hanging from the ceiling, there were these almost 200 submissions hanging in our consciousness about what is that is possible to be done in trying to understand different relationships. This is the biggest capital of a storefront. The space is extremely small, but as you can see, openings and events, they take over. They take over the sidewalk, they take over even to the street. And it is the power of people and the encounter and the conversations that occur in there that are able to catalyze new relationships. And it is in that sense that we always try to reinvent. So even when an exhibition has already occurred elsewhere, like Arcazines, we really try to bring it into a different format. This was an exhibition about little publications all over the world. And as you can see, they were planted in this metal field in such a way that when you would walk around them, you would touch them and they would fall. And why would they fall? Because what we want to actually, in a certain way, encourage is the consciousness of that materiality, the fragility of that space of publication, and the need for touching and for having. We all have, in a certain way, a kind of reminiscent relationship to those elements. So exhibitions try to be performative installations, even when they are simply just looking like they are of display. So events, publications, competitions, exhibitions, projects. Projects take place outside of the gallery. Here, this is the Space Buster. The Space Buster is simply a truck. It's a milk truck, actually. It's a project by Ram Labor from Berlin that was commissioned in 2007 to come to New York and to insert space. Space for collective gathering. Space there where we think there is no space. We can walk around Kuwait probably and find a parking lot, find just something that really we would not say it's a space for gathering, and put the truck, inflate the bubble, and have something like this happen inside. This is an event, this is a manifesto series on mobility that happened in New York 2 years ago within the Idea City Festival, where we put from Bjarke Ingels to Daniel Perlin to people that actually are just emerging thinkers to discuss some of those ideas. So, and you can see here below how this truck can be inserted into like an abandoned parking lot within a bridge or any other space. Projects also try to bring the idea of design and creativity into the larger public by actually putting them into work. This is a project that is called The Generator, also done together with Ramlabor, where citizens can come and produce chairs. This project was called Chairs for Urbanity. In New York, there has been a long-standing policy of really creating very controlled public spaces. There are not enough chairs. If one goes into Barcelona, one will find chairs everywhere. Public space is a space of gathering where people can come together. So we said we cannot do architecture for humanity, but we can do chairs for urbanity. So we asked people to come and assemble those chairs. That was extremely easy, and as you can see, children of all ages were there making their own chair, and we asked them to distribute them around the city. And we did find some of those chairs walking down, these were some pictures that we received, walking down almost the bridge. Projects actually also include designing applications. Some of us, we like to talk, and we can talk forever, but some of us are really good at drawing. How do we produce spaces of communication and debate that are not only language-based? Draw Think Tank was an application that we designed together with Joshua Ott, a graphic designer, to actually allow 10 people to draw simultaneously in the same space. So how can we have, instead of a think tank, to have just a draw think tank, and to allow drawing to be the generator of that? We put the idea out there. If anyone has the $60,000 that it takes to develop, we are happy to give them the idea and to go for it, because we believe it is a tool for actually facilitating new modes of engagement. There it is. What kind of other projects we do? Sometimes they are bigger, sometimes they are as small as sticker. What is the value of the city? What is the value of things? How can we reflect about how much does it cost to maintain a tree? How much does it cost to actually plant a tree or to design a street lamp? Citizens are not used to understand the value of design, and we believe that it's important to raise that kind of awareness. So, does this look like a very serious critical exercise? Well, as I said during my 20 words, we are really interested in laugh and laughter. What is the importance of laughter? When I'm really bad at telling jokes. But when someone is really good at telling a joke, what happens is that there is a moment where you realize something I said, you thought something was going to come up and something else comes in, right? And it is that moment of reflection where we find a common space where that laughter occurs and the absurdity of the construction of a new thought. So I'm extremely interested in laughter as a device for thinking. And since I don't know how to do jokes very well, I try to produce events that are able to generate that kind of similar situation. Being as a professor in Buffalo and also at Rice, I realized that the students in the architecture school would spend a huge amount of time, maybe 8 hours, but that's a huge amount of time, preparing their costumes for Halloween. They would go as sexy nurses or vampires or zombies. And I thought it was a real waste of time, right? So how do you take those 8 hours of creativity and you put them into play? And you say, well, there are also scary things within architecture. And we started thinking, what is the most feared ghost in art and architecture production? What is the thing that we fear the most? Oblivion probably is one, we don't want to be forgotten, but banality is also one of them. So we did a Halloween party on banality. And so we asked architects to come up and dress up as the most feared ghost of art and architecture. So a party happened and people did come up as the most feared ghosts of cloud thoughts, of plastic bubbles, or Bjarke Ingels as the King Kong and Empire State architecture. But more interesting ones, we had the lasso function within Photoshop, right? It's extremely banal and actually really clumsy. You might recognize he's Mark Kushner from Architizer. Here we have the guys from Pinup coming as these twin towers, or we have Jacob Wilscomic, who is actually an amazing graphic designer, coming as the Raising Currents. Or we have here one of the first prizes, when I saw this, I said, what is that? And I got close to them and they were like, come to me. So when I would look through this little hole that was this opening, it said, banality is in the eye of the beholder. And I said, you're right. So this was a very interesting costume, but these two, who I didn't really know and they look extremely scary, they were two skellies. The skellies that we put in every architectural model, that they represent standard subjects. The man with the little umbrella and the hat, the woman with the little luggage. What architecture do we do and for who, right? This idea of a standardized representation of the subject of architectural production, that is a space of banality. So those are the kind of ideas that we were interested in producing. The second year, we did it again, and the theme was metaphors. Metaphors probably is one of the most misused spaces of generative action. And we produced the first bibliography for a party. So I encourage you to go into our webpage and to look into that bibliography and how from Barthes to actually Derrida, you can find spaces for that. Of course we do parties, but we also do serious talkings, and we believe that both of them are extremely important. Projects actually included Postopolis, a project that initiated by Joseph Grima, the director that preceded me, who now is at the directorship of Domus. And Postopolis was really trying to articulate back in the year 2007 how bloggers, people who were having hundreds of thousands of visitors and fans within the online community, were able to influence or not the conversations about architecture and try to confront these two spaces. Projects actually, of course, include interventions in the city. So this was a project made out of hula hoops, extremely cheap, done extremely fast, trying to really transform a urban space into a space of gathering that we brought afterwards into Milan and into all kind of different spaces. What kind of projects do we do as an institution of 30 years old? Something I want you to actually think at some point is to be able to visit Storefront's webpage. And this is space, oops, let's see if we can go here, yeah. So Storefront's webpage, and I'm showing this so that you can understand all the historical weight that the institution carries. There is here this button, the archive, where you can actually go into the 1980s in its beginning and go into its first show and to try to look one by one what ideas, what exhibitions, what projects were done. In order to move into the future, is extremely important to know the past. And this is something that for me is actually perhaps as important as to produce radical ideas. So I encourage you to go into the archive and try to understand what kind of projects were being produced throughout the history of the institution, to understand what has been the history of the avant-garde during the last 30 years. We are approaching, obviously, the age. I always say there are 3 ages in history. One is the history of the now, that is usually can be bought either through money or through friendships. Is how many likes do you get in Facebook, how many articles do you get in the magazine of fashion, and that can sometimes produce a huge amount of anxiety if your ideas are liked or not liked. At a storefront, we don't care about that. Really, we don't. There is a second age in history that is in the 10, 15 years margin, that is the one of alliances. How many connections did you get? How many historians or recent historians are willing to write about what you do and what you are doing? We are also not that much interested in those ones. But there is a third age in history, that is the history of ideas. And sometimes those histories are only excavated by historians, intrepid historians, that are able to look back and say, that was an innovative idea that actually changed and influenced many things in its own time. And that is the kind of history that we are interested in, and that's the history that we work for. People, who is Storefront? As I was telling before, Storefront is people who believe that a different way of doing things is possible. Usually that belongs into people who is below 35 years old, real or fictional. Not necessarily how old you are, but how old you feel you are. And it is this idea that storefront is a space of change, where ideas that are not necessarily extremely well formulated have a space of action, because those ideas are the ones that are going to really change the trajectory of things. Storefront is an institution that doesn't receive any real funding from the state. Everything is done through membership, grant applications, private foundations, and membership. Membership, and this is a dinner inside the gallery. If you are one of our high members, we will sit down and eat in this 100 people table to try to understand that this is a community of architects, thinkers, and artists in New York that believe that this place should exist and it must exist. This is how events look like. We have a very small space, but it gets filled and crowded and full. And this is why Storefront has remained an extremely vital institution within the ecology of institutions in New York. There are many other ones that represent institutionalized ways of doing, that represent historical ways of doing. We represent a new, emerging, fresh way of doing. So I want to talk about some exhibitions in more depth. This was an exhibition we did last summer, and we are going to do it again, that was called Aesthetics and Aesthetics. This exhibition was questioning the way we draw and we represent architecture, and how tiresome is to see the renderings that we see around that have either a lot of children to make it happy, a lot of green to make it ecological, maybe axonometries to have it very serious and intellectual, or some comic bubbles to make it fun, or some clouds and birds to make it more airy. What we did was we took all these renderings that we found online, and we just removed the architecture and we left the green. We removed the architecture and we left the children. We removed the architecture and we left the clouds and the birds. We could not remove the architecture from the axonometry. We just put all the axonometries we found. So how all this aestheticization of thought or of airiness or of happiness is used in architecture, we put it here as a wallpaper, and we wallpapered the entire space. One was stepping on these cliches of architectural representation, and what we did is we commissioned 30 architects to draw storefront. And those drawings were going to be shown inside storefront. So many few times you can actually have the draw representation of a space inside the space while you are experiencing that space. And it was fascinating to see how drawing was able to convey so many different ideas, how the pattern of the facade could become not only a vertical pattern, but also an understanding of the city as a kind of a master plan. This was from Leon, Dominic, and Chris. And how those ideas of scale, or like trying to look back, this was a drawing by Productora in Mexico, just shifting the scale of things could bring another understanding, or how this drawing by Jürgen Meyer of the corner of the exhibition was made with the indexical representation of the isolating material, right? This was an installation that he did back in the 80s, where he projected foam all over the corner. So how do you map in one single image perspectival representation with indexical representation? I think it is a very interesting aspect. Or Jimenez Ley, how he actually, through his comic, actually tried to draw all the different events that we do at the storefront with our paella series or our cabaret series, and actually the basement. Interestingly enough, this is me, obviously, working in the basement with our disco ball, with the little amount of space that we do actually have, with our little treasure archive, or how Vision Arc was trying to understand the newsprint of a storefront, or storefront is just a mirror of that what happens in society, in front of it, and so on. So each one of the drawings was really trying to understand. This was Skew in Hong Kong, how a storefront could be extruded into a new understanding of urban space, or Office, Kirsten Gears and David Van Severen, understanding what is this corner, a corner of a sky, a corner of a space, into an opening of a curtain of a theater of performance. Or people who work within restoration, This is an image of the facade. I don't know if you can see, but here there is an S that is drawn from the residues of the show that we just were talking before of sacred spaces in profane buildings, and he could find it through this excavation of the pollution in the surface. Or Andrew Zago saying storefront is a boat that moves. Even within this boat, it floats, it gravitates, and anything that is in top of it, anything that follows, it's always a bit displaced from its weight that it carries. And so on and so on. So this year we are going to have it again. This was Sho Shigematsu from OMA drawing through Google Earth and saying Google Earth should also have sectional drawings. And so if storefront was going to be represented through a sectional drawing, the sidewalk would also be part of it, because a storefront would not be understood without the sidewalk. Or that the square that we were talking before is also in a certain way within the mental map of a storefront's territory. So these are the power that I'm really interested in developing. This was Superpool from Istanbul, or WW trying to bring all kind of different aesthetics into the idea of disruption. Or Alejandro Zaera Polo drawing storefront through the relationships of people, and actually in this case using each person participating in this drawing show and their alliances and their relationships, to what schools they went, if they knew each other or not, and how these kind of graphics can also bring an architecture of relationships. But this one probably is one of my favorite ones. Storefront is 868 square feet. This is the footprint of storefront. As big as a subway car, or these are just the terraces of the Trump housing towers, or this is like the 1 mile kilometer. This is the base of the Statue of Liberty. What kind of residual spaces could we use? How many spaces in Kuwait could we use to have storefronts in there? I'm wondering. So another exhibition that I want to explain a bit more in detail is past futures, present futures. How do we move into the future is something that we can only do if we really understand the past. This was an exhibition that looked into 101 unrealized visionary projects that happened throughout the history of New York. And we asked 101 architects to give us the present or future reenactment, a reinterpretation of that past project into the future. So we did an installation, and as I say, even if I tell you that this is a project with 202 visions of past futures and present futures, you would say, I want to see them. When you would enter the exhibition, what you would find was that. A curtain of mirrors where you would just simply find your own reflection, and within that reflection, you would find yourself searching for a future that was almost not even there. And only within, you can see here in this sliver, a space that was a contextual form. This contextual form was giving you a context. The inhabitants, who was the mayor, relevant facts, notions that were happening in the world, but also within Western culture. And only within that space, then you would enter into this room where images were being shot into your face to try to understand what was actually happening in here. But what was more important about this exhibition is that the projects were not there. There was a QR code that you had to link in to actually go and find them. But I was really not interested in people seeing those projects. I was interested in people having the desire to see those futures and trying to imagine those futures, because this is the biggest force. Of course, we are going to publish a book with all of them, but the design, when I asked Leong from New York to design the exhibition, I said, I want to create a heterochrony. What is a heterochrony? Is a space of different temporalities, of multiple temporalities, where people get lost. And this is what I wanted to do. People to actually get lost. It is more powerful to get lost, to doubt, to hesitate, than to know, to consume, to absorb. So, of course, this was a widely reviewed exhibition where actually all these future projects were really trying to bring new understandings of New York, but also all kind of different poetic understandings of what we could do or how Manhattan could become this new elevated metropolis with a grid. This was a project by Jonathan Solomon. We talk about capital city. I'm about to finish. I think, like, I have no idea. You always lose the notion of time. There is something about what a storefront does that is also try to produce, as I said before, projects outside the gallery. So this is not the gallery, but it has the same shape as the gallery. This is a table. This is, as we were talking before, we have the space buster. This is a speech buster. This is a table that is able to sit 100 people around it, and is able to transform itself and to explode in all kind of different configurations. This table is going to be presented for the first time at the Idea City Festival on May 4th in New York. This has been designed by Jimenez Ley and Grayson Cox. And the table in and of itself allows for all kind of different playfulness. So it is color-coded with a gradient so that even when it dismantles, it can come together in a kind of orderly manner. And this is where I actually want to show you again within our website. There we go. Where you can find some of this information of the Idea City and how this table, but also all kind of other projects are going to be presented in there. The Idea City Festival is something that actually occurs every 2 years, and it really tries to bring together all kind of different experts about how should we imagine the city of the future. This year the theme is Untapped Capital, and within that, with Untapped Capital, this is the last thing I want to present as a storefront. We are launching right now, and it has been already launched, a competition. But this is a competition that is called the competition of competitions. Every time that a city is asking for a new opera house, or a city is asking for a new museum, or is asking for a new housing project, they sometimes repeat what they have found in other cities. They go into another city, they see another mayor, and they say, I love what you have, I want one like that one. And that is a huge problem, because while in the past architects were extremely close to politicians and decision makers, I think we have lost that kind of power. So this competition of competitions is called Redefining Briefs, Clients and Agents. And so this is really asking architects to provide the question, what is the competition that the mayor of Kuwait should be running? What is the competition that the mayor of New York should be running? And what should be the format? Who should be the jury? What should be the terms and conditions? So I invite you to actually think about that and submit. We are going to give 10 prizes, and we are going to run the exhibition that gets the award next year as part of our 2014 competition series. So we will have the competition of competitions of competitions. And why do we think that this competition is important? It's because we think that architecture has arrived to a space of almost irrelevance, and we have become service provider instead of society builders, and we think that that needs to change. So with that said, there is another side, but I think we might want to open up perhaps for questions. I do have another side that is not being the director of an institution, that is an architect that, and I always say this is how my head looks like. These are the buildings and architectures I've been producing over the last 10 years within my OA, that is Office of Architectural Affairs, but I call it OA, mostly because I'm interested in this gut and rational gut, right? And just going extremely fast, how to become a utopianizer of what we say before. I think there are 7 steps. One is to go towards cosmopolitan ethics, be a world citizen, democratize action, free speech, unveil power structures, remember the future, and love. And as you can see, they are not that different from the points that we have been talking before. The idea of how do we actually go into understanding all these different relationships, how we want to think big and small, understand the relationship between global and local, is something that needs to start obviously from the drawings. And it's something that, of course, I've always did as an architect, but now as a director, I'm extremely interested. How do we, as an institution, establish spaces of collaboration with local spaces within Kuwait, in our case, we are actually going into the Dominican Republic in a month to start a series of events over a week where we are going to bring a storefront as all this compilation of events and try to understand this relationship between local and global. How do we democratize action, for me, is of essential nature. How do we bring the chicken and the Chanel closer together? How do we bring the poor citizens that are only able to survive through this to the ones that are also only able to survive through this, and we treat them with the same kind of respect? How do we free speech, and how do we invent words, and how do we construct an onomatopoeic thought? Is one, but something that I'm also interested in is, for instance, how do we liberate the words like utopia? I always say that ideotopia was a word that was never invented and should be invented, and in order to free ideology from utopia. Projects that actually might resonate with some of contemporary conditions is how do we, as architects, introduce creativity in the redefining of economies. War is mostly, from my point of view, an economy war, always, constantly, even when it is in a religious aspect. So this was a very interesting, ironic, cynic, and optimistic understanding of warfare. If we were to transform rockets into fireworks, I always believe that if Barcelona was to bombard New York with an amazing array of fireworks, so that actually the mayor of New York would say, hey, come on, this cannot be. Barcelona simply just cannot give us the most amazing spectacle of fireworks. New York would send an amazing spectacle of fireworks back to Barcelona. So instead of bombing and killing people, one could kill, let's say, the pride of making the biggest spectacle. So these are the kind of projects I'm interested in. So this is a project trying to redefine how each one of these rockets can have a different geometry of fireworks to produce spectacles not of war, but actually of pleasure. And this is part of what has been always an interest of my game as an architect, but also as a practicing architect. How do we really bring war and the highest levels of conflict into the real spaces of the construction of the city? How do we take the old part of the city into the new understandings of it? Remembering the future and constructing timelines. History, again, is always a fiction, to be constructed and reinvented. Usually history is always the history of the powerful ones, and we need to be able to construct it every time again if we want to be able to construct a different future. And of course, as I said before, I don't know how to say jokes, so I make manifestos or stories. So I'm not going to tell any of those stories, but I'm going to willing to take a lot of questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Eva, for that presentation. And whoever has a question, please raise your hand. And don't be shy.
Some of the exhibitions that you make, are they too controversial and they haven't tried to stop you from making any of these?
This is the dream, right? I always say that we really do try to take risks, right? And the idea is, when I did the first event of the productive disagreement about the Atlas of the conflict, the president of the board said, Eva, it would be great if you would actually tell the police, the precinct of the neighborhood, that you are doing this event and what is the nature of it. And I said, why? He said, Eva, you are in New York, right? Don't be naive. Those are contested issues. And it's like, I would recommend to take the television and the valuable down because something might happen. And I said, okay. So the week before, actually, we tried to do an event, and we wanted to cut the street to like have like this one of the drawing against the facade, and we talked with the police to try to see if that was possible, and it was like, it's impossible, you need a permit for a month. So when I called the police and I said, hey, I just want to inform you that tonight we're going to have an event of this nature, it's like, do you want us to cut the street? I'm like, no, not tonight, right? So nothing happened, right? When we were having the sacred spaces in profane buildings, we didn't know what would happen, or if we would get any graffitis or any kind of confrontation. We had people who would come and pray in the gallery, right? And that actually was fascinating to see. We don't have problems, we haven't had any problems yet, but we do not shy away from the possibility that that might emerge. It's not that we search conflict for the sake of it, but we just simply try to open up, right, to the important conversations that we should have in our present time. The next exhibition that we are having and opening on the 30th is called No Shame, Storefront for Sale. So we are selling the institution. And of course what we did is we asked 10 artists to give us an understanding of what things can be purchased or obtained to understand the value of private sponsorship and collaborations between capital and culture. We go into MoMA. In a certain way, the galleries or the spaces are, can be totally sponsored, right? So this is our Facebook page. If you are not in our Facebook liking community of 27,683, please do. But this is the next exhibition, right? Is saying every single space is branded, is named. And what does that mean? What does that produce? So we are bringing that into a space of real questioning and really trying to understand how we can change the way we think about value. So we are going to have a honking concert. So at 5 p.m. on Friday there is always a terrible traffic jam and people making noise, and so someone can sponsor that traffic jam at 5 p.m. and that becomes a concert, right? So each artist is bringing a different understanding. One is making a Monopoly game where one can buy the air between the panels, where one can buy the possibility of screaming in the street, and trying to understand what is that we value as a cultural institution and what is the role of a storefront. We always invade the public space, as you have seen, outside in the streets. I also like to have architects and designers design benches and all kind of different urban furniture. And it's funny because a lot of people from other institutions, they ask me, how long did it take you to get the permit for this? Like, what permit, right? So the facade was built in '92 without a permit. I mean, we would never get a permit to build a facade that invades a public space. We still don't have a permit. It has been for 20 years there, right? So we get, and it's New York, where everything is so hard to do. But somehow we have a kind of a state of exception because there is an extreme value in actually being able to give voice to voices that are just trying to say something else. And something else not just for the sake of it, but for the necessity of it. And so as an alternative institution, I always say we never ask for permission, we always ask for mercy. But no, so far I think I haven't got in any trouble that I'm conscious of. So no, yeah.
You mentioned in regards to seeing like storefront as a possibility, as something new. I'm sure you said your second visit to Kuwait, and I'm sure you've also been to some other parts of the region like Dubai or Abu Dhabi.
Yeah, I was in Dubai, yeah.
I'm sure you've heard of the Sadiat project, which was mainly just bringing the Louvre and bringing in the Sorbonne University and stuff like that. And it's all about importing the culture. Of course, the storefront over here is something that actually started from New York, and of course it's helped a lot through the youth of New York, and of course the cosmopolitan factor of New York and stuff like that. How do you see storefront here?
We actually have been talking about that. I wanted to give an overview of what is that we have done. We are going to be launching on the 15th of May a project that is called Worldwide Storefront Biennial. I have no interest in going around and making little, let's say, McDonaldizations, right, of a storefront. Mostly because I don't know what it means to be alternative in Kuwait. To be alternative in New York is not the same as to be alternative here. So this Worldwide Biennial is going to be asking people around the world to submit a proposal for a 2-month period of exhibition and events that produce an alternative voice within their context. So we are asking people to have a vision, to have obviously a location, and what that location means and represents within their cultural context is of extreme importance to us, to have a series of exhibitions or an exhibition and a series of events, to have a digital strategy, because we are going to bring all those different locations around the world, we are thinking of 20, together into a situation room that we will create at the storefront, and a budget, mostly because we are going to be able to contribute with some seed money, but we expect the people to be able to run this place autonomously. So why do we do this project? Is because one, we have been asked so many times to do a storefront, and I'm no one to come here to tell what is alternative action in here, but I'm really interested in alternative actions in here. And I know that the only way for me to facilitate and to ignite that fire is to allow for visibility and a network of support where I can tell you, this is how we make it happen. We can share knowledge of the know-how, but I need of your understanding of the cultural, architectural framework in which you practice, in which you live, to actually make it happen. So we will take the submissions, we will select these 20 locations, we will open on May 1st, 2014, run for 2 months. Everything will come into a collective online platform. So of course, everyone needs to have a digital strategy about how the content is being communicated. And we are going to have this situation room in New York where people can come and see what's going on and understand what are these other spaces. That's how I see storefront being in New York, right? I can be in New York and we can talk and we can see, Eva, what do you think? And then is knowing exactly how to change the context, how to be a utopianizer, how to represent, how to enable, but how to agitate, right? And this is for me an extremely important project. First, questioning the idea of the biennial as a place where there are 2 types of biennial. One where simply architects and their friends and the friends of the friends, they go and have an amazing time and they just reestablish themselves within the power structure. The other one is when cities, they want to be part of a global map, but they don't really know why, and they actually just somehow buy products, right? Or art or projects that already has happened anywhere else. They don't care what, but they just want to make it happen so that they are part of a global map. So I'm not interested in neither one nor the other. I'm really interested in being able to portray, to allow for these alternative voices to emerge. So this is how I see storefront happening, and this is how I see an institution emerging in Kuwait, and we have been talking through the last 20 hours about that, and I encourage, we are going to send that call for submissions, and we are going to expect to receive some proposals from Kuwait, right? So I encourage here everyone to be tuned and to say, Eva, we have a project. I guess that answers your question, right? Yeah.
Ideas in such context as Kuwait, but at the same time, I'm wondering if storefront as a facade that it has actually a depth of a sidewalk as much as it has a depth of its interior. Suddenly it's a reading of the city that is happening on the inside. If it needs as a prerequisite a specific infrastructure or social maturity to get into such, agitations, into such ideas that where people actually have the potential to argue and to dissect specific, conflicts or conditions of unrest. But also, here the question is, one, about the infrastructure that is needed on the other side of such institutions as storefront, and two, the possibility of franchising storefront as an idea, you know, unlike the Guggenheim or Shake Shack that actually made it to the Arab world, but how you can bring storefront as an idea, as polemics, you know, as ways to be here without the physical manifestation. Because in by itself, it is not, it's more an apparatus to make the public engage, you know, and usually it's through the densification on this sidewalk.
Yeah.
So what do you think could actually migrate from storefront into such contexts within the Arab world?
Yeah. When I was saying before that we are going to the Dominican Republic in a month, they asked the same question, right? And it took me like 2 years to figure out how we could go before waiting for this proposal, just as the biennial in a certain way needs to come from one side. How can we go there in one side? We finally came out with the right format. So when I was talking about this series, right, the productive disagreements, the interrogation series, the manifesto series, and so on, those are what I call not contented formats, but formatted contents, where what we bring is a methodology. And I think this is what a storefront can provide, is a methodology of inquiry to try to bring together individuals and ideas into a space of interaction. And this is what we are going to be doing from June 24th, I believe, to like July 1st. Go to the Dominican Republic and try to understand how we can bring that kind of conversation and to test the ground and to see what kind of desire, what kind of circumstances, and I can bring my, let's say, infrastructural power of dissemination, but also of expertise to see how those things can happen. And we will see, right? It's always an experiment as well. And so that lasts for a week, and we will just make it happen. I just need to recognize and in public that the storefront, as much as it is a big institution, we are 4 people working in the basement, right? And I think this should bring everyone a huge amount of fresh air that 4 people can really run a space of a lot of action. Of course, we carry in our shoulders like giants, right? That are all the people who are the board of directors and the board of advisors who give support and who love this space very much. But this is why I think it is important to find alliances within all kind of different spheres in every single context to find the 35 or under year old within every one of us, right? And I think this is why it's, as an infrastructure, I think a storefront always dwells in something that we all carry that is called hope, right? And I think that's an extremely powerful device. A poor one, because hope doesn't have a lot of money. And under 35-year-olds, they don't have a lot of money either. But we are always extremely known for doing a lot with very little, right? We always run with extremely thin budgets. And this is something that we are proud of, even if we are trying to grow in not so much in scale, but in a scope, in the role of what it means to be a global institution within a world that has and should have very well-articulated local desires. And I think that's where we think that we can play a role within all these kind of globalizing practices of cultural expansion and colonialism, that at the end is a new contemporary form of colonialism that I think is extremely problematic. So I think, did I answer the 2 questions? Yeah, good.
You started to talk by presenting what you believe to be the 5 or 6 domains of human reality, which is like technological and cultural, social, anthropological, and so on. And then you go on to say that your goal is to create a cross-contamination between these 5 or 6 domains. ended up with these events and brainstorming sessions that produce all these sorts of ideas that each and one of them is sort of like a combination of the other domains and present something new and novel. But then you have to deal with the fact that these events, these exhibitions, are of an ephemeral nature. As soon as they're done, they're done. So everything that lives on is in the memory of the participants, or you're recreating their memory to us here by having this presentation. So what exactly do you hope to achieve if the product is so ephemeral? Do you hope to achieve something that leaks into, well, the particular social context and then produce any kind of art, any kind of architecture?
Yeah.
Or is it just the event itself as a bubble in time?
Yeah, I think this is a fantastic question, actually. Temporalities, right? And so there are three temporalities, again, to the acts that one does. The nature of the event is double, right? One is that we started streaming, right? And so the fact that you are here, it's very different if you would be at your home, seeing me through a streaming device, not feeling there is a presence about us, there is the space, the resonance, there are so many things that are extremely important, and we dwell on that aspect of the now and the ephemerality of it. There are a lot of things that cannot be registered or recorded, but we do stream and we do record all the events, and so this is, or like Vimeo account where you can actually go, and so 3 days ago we uploaded the definition series on capital or the reading images in instant culture, and so you can go and visit all these kind of events and interviews and things that we do carry. But that's just one space of permanence that doesn't necessarily, that is just a recording. When we have the books, the publications, right, when we do find that within an event there has been enough amount of material that is worth bringing into the book format, then we do a publication. We spend the time, so we spent a year editing and asking more text and revising, and so we produce a book. When in an event we realize that there is an idea that is interesting, the day after I send an email and I say, I would love if you would help us to apply for a grant so that we can actually materialize some of those ideas, right? So there is a kind of, the events is a space for the articulation of things that afterwards they somehow leave into some other actions. There is another project that we do carry that is that is trying to understand how architects, and it's not only architects but also artists and entrepreneurs can have ideas. We know Kickstarter, right? A way to like find funding for your own ideas. We want architectural ideas that, or artistic ideas that have to do with our mission of trying to re-envision public life, to find a connection with funding sources. So we have this storefront starter that in this case, like the current project that we have is the Plus Pool, is this kind of floating pavilion in Manhattan that will be able to clean the water of the river and at the same time while cleaning the water is able somehow to provide for a new public space in New York. So some of the ideas, we really try to push them so that they actually do have a life after them, and so that probably if they raise, and we are helping them, the $20 million that it actually requires to make this prototype, we could have like a pool floating in Manhattan, cleaning the water and allowing us to have an amazing experience in there. We were in the first step to raise $1 million. We are extremely far away from that. That's the entire budget that we have almost for a storefront, even less than that. But we help individuals with ideas to go further. So those are like the different stages, right? From an event to a Vimeo video, to a publication, to a project, to perhaps a building, right? And so this is the kind of lines of consequence and how visionary ideas can be pushed and brought forward. I wish we could do more of those, but these are all the spaces that we can afford, let's say, in making ideas actually truly happen. So Yeah, is that, do you have any suggestions about something we could do in order to like bring ideas into another level of relevance?
Well, if I have an idea, so you're a richer person.
No, but I mean, this is, we are going to be sending a call for applications, and of course we do choose which projects we give support or not, because this is also a platform for innovative ideas to be exposed, right? And so I encourage you to keep track. If you are not subscribed to our newsletter, you should go here and put your email and and then you will receive all our weekly newsletters that sometimes are even a lot. But yes.
My name is Shayma, and I'm an architect. Thank you for such projects. I'm sure you're enhancing the society. My question is, how do you evaluate your work? I mean, such ideas, I mean, you need some sort of feedback from the society so you can understand whether you're successful or not. So this is my question. Thank you.
I was saying before, success is a very dangerous word, right? And for that probably I'm too stubborn to believe even when someone tells me I don't like that. You will always find someone else that would say I love that. One needs to have certain beliefs, ethical imperatives that drive one. And I try to be as sensible as to many things as possible, and I talk to many people, and I hear almost as many opinions as I can, from the homeless that passes by the gallery, to the woman who delivers the postage, to architects, to philosophers, and try to understand what is the zeitgeist, right? What is the spirit of our own time, and how our events and projects resonate with that. The idea, every time that you submit for a grant, they actually ask you for measure, like how do you measure your success? So I can tell you what we write on grants and what governments like to hear, that you are going to look in how much your membership increases, how much, just how many visitors do you have, how many likes do you have. Those things, to the general scope of ideas, they don't matter. Right? Visionary ideas, they don't necessarily have a lot of funds. Britney Spears has a lot of funds, right? But I'm not going to try to be Britney Spears within the architecture world. So success is a very, very dangerous word. And I think one really needs to understand what changes one is able to produce within established modes of production. And I'm happy when I see that a conference in a university is taking into an exhibition that we produce, or when I actually see other institutions taking into our own formats of experimentation, or already commissioning projects to the artists or architects that we have been working with, because then I can move on into some other ground and try new things. So for me, success is in seeing how those experiments that we produce, they start transforming society in some way, so we can keep on doing other ones, right? I always say we try to open ground there where no one really goes. And sometimes we take dead ends. Who cares, right? That's not necessarily a failure, that's a success in another future, right? Or in another time. And this is why it's important to have archives and to understand the value of things. And because every time that we do something, there is a reason behind it, and it is important to understand the context that generates them. And for that, I would say I will take all the blame, but and I will not take any success, because success, it's relative, right? It's extremely relative. I think what for me is successful is when someone comes and says, I feel I can be alive again, right? I feel I can express ideas that come from within in a way that no other spaces allow. When you really provide for a space of publicness, that gives me pleasure, right? That makes me happy when people feel that they are empowered to actually speak up and to propose things. I think this is the most important element. But I don't really look for success in that regard. I'm driven by ideas, and if we get less likes, who cares? like it's probably the network wasn't working well, or right? It's like I will just blame some other things. I will keep on doing what I think should be done, regardless of, and that is extremely dangerous because that might produce dictators are like that, right? But I'm a very soft dictator. I listen a lot, and then I still do whatever I want to do. But more than a soft dictator, I always like to say I'm a midwife, right? I always told to my students when I was teaching, and also now as a director, is that if there is something that you do carry, if there is something out there that you have inside that is still not outside, I'm going to help you pull it out. It's going to be painful, it's going to be extremely difficult, but I'm going to help. And this is what I do. If there are ideas that are inside that I think they are valuable, and that for me is a success, the process of bringing something inside out. But yeah, that's how I measure things. I don't measure them.
You need to submit to the competition of competitions, right?
That's the first step towards bridging that gap. When you actually have a way to articulate the desires of society in a way that politicians or developers, they don't know how to articulate, and then win that competition yourself. So that would be the first step. I think I always say the future of a storefront in an ideal world would be that a storefront would not exist, right? So that experimentation and instigation and public life and discourse would happen everywhere, in every single building, in every single moment of life. As long as that doesn't happen, we will have to exist. And that's great because then I have a job. But I'd rather have no job, right, than have one. So this is why trying to insert mechanisms within already existing pedagogical structures, within existing spaces of production. We are working with corporate offices as well as emerging offices and try to establish collaboration so that even the corporate world is able to take from the freshness and agility of much more emerging practices and try to see that this division that we produce, that we have a tendency, it's so easy. If you divide, right, you win. And the ones that win are always the ones that are on top already. So we are trying to merge those things. And so those are the mechanisms. And so all these events, all these ephemera, they are mechanisms to try to break those divisions. But I would say that the most effective as of now is the competition of competitions. I would take it actually pretty serious. And something that we might, and that we are doing once we will have all these submissions, if you propose something for the mayor of Kuwait, we will make sure that if that one is one of the 10 selected, that it arrives. We will go through all the protocols. We have already been talking with people in different spaces of power from the UN and so on, to try to find the paths and the ways that those proposals can get there, from like Amnesty International, right, to some kind of other spaces. And this is where we take our role extremely serious in really trying to just go beyond the event, right, into real social change.
If any of you would like to receive emails or invites about our next lectures and events, please we'll have a piece of paper and just come to me and we'll write it down and we'll send you our next events that are happening. Thank you all for participating, and we thank Eva for her beautiful presentation.
Thank you.